It seems like it's been 40 weeks since you got 40 winks. Your back pain? Unbearable. Tossing, turning, trying to find that pain-free position. And that's the moment you realize you can't spend another waking moment putting off treatment.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for spine care, with a ton of surgical and non-surgical treatments for back pain. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better, the Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 725, Healing Trauma in the Body with Sarah Buffie.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started. What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Hello, friends. Before we get into this amazing conversation, which it really is an amazing conversation with Sarah Buffie, I want to tell you about my amazing friend Sarah, who has been my health coach for the past year, who has been absolutely amazing. And Sarah and her whole team with Team Fit With Me can do so much. If you're interested in health coaching, if you're interested in personal training virtually, if you're interested in getting labs done and knowing more about your body, or if you have gut health conditions or thyroid diseases or hormonal dysfunction, Sarah and her team can help you out, including creating meal plans, creating workout plans, being that accountability buddy. She's absolutely amazing. I would definitely reach out to Sarah, check out everything she has to offer, ask some questions. And right now you can get 10% off month one of all packages, plans, and add-on services when you go to teamfitwithme.com/poundthis, which you'll find in the show notes. And you'll see all the pricing, all that fun stuff right there. So if you're in need of a great virtual health coach, Sarah and Team Fit With Me is your ladies. teamfitwithme.com/poundthis. Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I am Amanda Valentine. Very excited to chat with my guest today, Sarah Buffie from Soulbird Consulting. How are you?
Wonderful. Thanks, Amanda. How are you doing?
I'm good. So I was introduced to you from a person who has been on this podcast multiple times, Rochelle Fraboda, and Rochelle is amazing. And I know I just went to her wedding a couple weeks ago, and it was the most fun wedding I have ever been to in my life. And I was talking to her over drinks about how I was reading this book about like trauma in the body and how the body stores trauma. And from me, like how to, through exercise and movement and all of the things, she's like, oh my gosh, you have to talk to Sarah. And she was like texting you right at the bar. and she's just like, you two have to connect and have this conversation. Yeah. I'm like, yes, I am down for it. So I'm very excited to hear everything that you have to say. And I know that you also have like just a deep wealth of knowledge. So I think we can start there of, your background and who you are and kind of where you got your start to where you are now.
I love it. Great connection from Rochelle. We both have a similar energy, so I can imagine. I was just like, you guys got to chat.
Yeah.
Glad to be here. Man, I think it might be helpful even to kind of work backwards. Currently, I'm an engager. I'm a facilitator. I work with parents, families, educators, social service folks, and help people who are caring for others, help people who are in relationship with others, how we can understand how trauma or early complex childhood trauma impacts the brain, the body, and our behavioral patterns, and then how we can join each other on the healing journey. And I start there because when I back up my experience, I have a lot of experience with community organizing, working with folks, adults with developmental disabilities, and helping people find their passions, their interests. Where do they connect in the community? How do we start to build relationships with folks based on what we love versus what our labels are? And so through that experience, through connecting with folks and helping build community, once I learned more about trauma and how it impacts the brain and body, for me, I feel like I got two worlds just really collided for me and really clicked. The fact that when we think about health, mental, emotional, physical health, meaning and purpose and belonging are key components there. And when we think about trauma-informed anything, being seen, being heard, being connected to, right? That purpose, meaning, and belonging, it's a very similar lane there. So I could go on more and more about how I got there, but I think my passion for community building and for not just empathy, but really hearing people's stories and helping them feel seen and heard, it's a passion of mine, and it's also a passion of mine to help caregivers do the same, take that big intention they have and create the impact that we so desperately want to make in the lives of others.
That's awesome. So I think that when people hear trauma, like you automatically think, oh, there's got to be some level of like physical abuse or some like huge event had to happen. And I guess, is that what trauma is, or what is trauma? Because I mean, in my definition of like just the past 2 years of living in a global pandemic is pretty traumatizing.
Yes. No, I love that to start out with definitions so we can really kind of get on the same page. And there's a couple that I'll throw out. Usually when I train or when I support folks, I'll lay out different definitions and see really what fits, what really lands in your perception. So one thing, trauma isn't the event specifically in isolation. It's how we experience that event. So you and I could both get in a car wreck, right? And if you have people come to your aid and there's a clear beginning and a middle and an end and you get support and care and nurture, your brain and body don't store that event as an isolating, alone, terrifying experience. It stores it in that thing happened, it sucked, but it's in the past. Trauma, those are memories that get stuck in the here and now part of your brain, right? So you can think about, we think about the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Of course, that study was done back in 1990, and what that encompasses is child abuse, neglect, so physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, being in a home where there's a lot of drug activity, where there's mental health issues, and people aren't getting the care they need, right? So all of these are circumstances, but those in and of themselves don't necessarily create the traumas, right? So there's shock trauma, where something happens, an event happens, a natural disaster, a car wreck, I broke my leg, right? And that could be, those could be traumatic experiences. There's also developmental and relational trauma. And that's where I think we get a lot of confusing in our definitions, because maybe I grew up in a home where there was abuse and neglect. And so the development, my development was compromised by lack of safety, lack of trust, lack of predictability, a lack of or disrupted attachment. And so that could leave developmental traumatic imprints, right? Or I grow up with no abuse, no neglect, but my mom is not emotionally available, and so we don't attach, and that creates a relational trauma that later on in my life that will play out relationally in whatever relationships, right? So so there's a couple different semantics. The last one I'll say here is that one of the things, I think it was John O'Donohue said, trauma isn't what was done to you, it's what was done to you did to you. So it's the lasting impact in how your brain and your body and then your behavioral patterns navigate to seek safety or to protect.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that's the really fun part, is in whenever you get to try to unwind all of that.
I think so.
After living in that forever. And I think that, I guess the first step to that too is also just recognizing what those patterns are. And, at least that's part of my journey is, I mean, I think that I could even go into some sort of like spiritual awakening sort of territory of realizing of like, oh, I realize I'm doing this behavior. This behavior isn't serving me. Where's the root of this behavior coming from? And I feel like for me, a specific example in like my own weight loss journey is I felt like that I was just, yo-yo dieting for a decade and couldn't figure everything out until I kind of looked at some of my actions like binge eating. And instead of, just writing this narrative in my head of like, oh, well, you just have no control and just kind of, you have no willpower, of really being like, no, why am I doing this? Like really sit down and feel those really gross feelings and feel them. And what is triggering this? Where's the root problem? And then digging that up. And I felt like I didn't really have any real solutions until I faced those sort of things. But that is not fun work.
Yes. Yes. That's it's hard work. It can be lonely work. And I think that's one of those other things when you experience something as traumatic, usually you're in isolation. There's been a rupture of a relationship. So that doing the healing work in community, in partnership with others, is a way to navigate the hardship, like you say, that is going beyond the surface. What you described is what happens a lot, I think, in our mental and physical health systems, where we get distracted by a symptom. And we have all kinds of ideas about the symptom, and we change, and that's the yo-yo dieting. The symptom is the weight gain, right?
Yeah.
When you get to the root, now your interventions can be done at the root. And this is what I always say, with awareness, we have choices. So the first step is to not just cultivate the awareness, but start to lift the shame and blame. Don't get attached to narrative and story that will bring your anxiety levels up, but come into your body, engage your breath, and start to create some space. You can figure out what am I becoming aware of? What am I noticing, right? How can I be more conscious of what's going on? And then with that consciousness, then we can start to pick and choose different supports or different next steps that are, again, angled at the root versus addressing a symptom.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that's so difficult is there's a lot of shame and blame and ugliness in looking at that. But also, at least speaking from my own experience, is like then I learned to deal with those sort of things by distractions. Yes. So then you're trying to look inward and do that breath work and feel it out. But it's like, my natural inclination is to like, well, get on your phone and get on TikTok and scroll, or go answer some emails, or go for a walk, or just do anything but actually like deal with the thing. Yes. And so trying to figure that out, that sucks.
It does suck. It sucks. It's what we're up against for sure.
So what would your recommendation for that be whenever I feel like that's probably a lot of people, is to distract myself from feeling these sort of feelings, or going in and doing that kind of breath work meditation. Like, how do you actually set a routine without trying to constantly busy yourself so you don't sit there in that moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. My colleague Amy Chavez would be great for this podcast. LaShonda Sugg, you should also meet. So shout out to both of them. They would be great conversationalists for this topic. Amy always talks about how physiology comes before psychology. So when we can understand our body and those patterns and those protective mechanisms before we bring in personality or thought or the psychology of it all, we're going to have a higher probability of keeping to new habits or keeping to, new practices, but again, relieving that shame and blame. So the first thing I would do is, if you try to sit and meditate and your mind goes to distraction, forgive yourself. Yeah. Know that that's normal. Not only is it normal, it's your body, it's your physiology working towards a temporary relief of the pain, or to avoid it, right? To distract from that. Those are all survival strategies. So first we need to let go of the shame and blame of those. That's going to happen, right? The physiology of stress and worry, right? When we have a stressful experience and then we go into our mind and we think, we have all these stressful thoughts, leads to higher blood pressure, higher rapid heart rate, inflammation, right? And then what happens is, like you talked about, our behavioral patterns start to show up. And our behaviors stem out of those physiological experiences, the physiology of the stress response, right? Then we have habitual behaviors that are, again, to either temporarily avoid or to stop what's going on. We do that, or to distract. We do that through overeating, overworking, over-scrolling, right? We have all these things to distract. And then the habit continues because those things actually contribute to the physiology of stress. So the reason why I'm saying that is because if you can back all the way up, and now we have this awareness, we can see, where do I intervene, right? There's a couple places we can intervene. If a stressful experience happens and I go into my narrative and I create story about the past and the future, I'm just contributing to the physiological stress response, because the past is done and the future isn't here yet. So one way to intervene is not go to story, go up into our heads, but come down into your body. It doesn't mean you got to stay there forever, but it could mean you say, oh, look, I have hands. Instead of, oh my God, did I do those things right? Is that going to happen again? Right? Instead of going in your mind, look where you are. Literally orient to your physical surroundings. I'm in a room. There's a white wall behind me. I can feel my hands on my knees. I'm going to take a sip of water, right? Orient back to the present moment. The reason why I think that's powerful is because in presence, we have choices. You can only act in the present moment. You can't act in the past. You can't act in the future. So if I can slow things down and come back to the present moment, orienting to the external, where am I? What's going on? Now I have a wider lens to address the next step, the next issue, the problem. So now I have choice. If I'm just stressed, I'm going to go to overscroll. If I'm just stressed, I'm going to go to overeat. But if I can engage the pause, I can sit in the pause, then I can say, okay, what will help me feel a little bit better in this moment? What will distract me in a healthy way, right? I can come back. My therapist talks about corral the worry. Give your worry a date. Hey, Tuesday at 10 a.m., I'm going to spend all the time with all my worried thoughts. I'm going to put it in my calendar. And so it's literally telling your mind, we're gonna get there. I'm not pushing you away. I always talk about too, what we resist will persist. So push away the thoughts. You can corral the worry. You can put a date in your calendar and get into the worry of it, right? So there's a couple other directions I could go, but I want to pause to see if that's making sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And then I guess to give an example, this just literally happened to me yesterday, where I feel like my growth is coming from in this of taking that pause and really sorting through those ugly feelings. Is I was having a conversation yesterday, and it was, about like, work performance sort of stuff, like job roles and everything. And for some reason, my brain immediately went to like, well, I'm not doing good enough. Like, tell me what else I can do. If I'm not doing something well, will you just tell me? And I went kind of into this like fevered, like, oh my God. And I took the conversation that way, and then it was trying to unwind that of like, I'm not saying those sorts of things. And then afterwards I'm like, okay, I need to really sit with this. And then I'm like, oh my God, that was just me projecting. That was my insecurities about myself. I feel like I'm not doing good enough. I feel like I'm not contributing in the best ways. That was not what was said to me. I was taking that as what was said to me, or it was some subliminal way of that was what's being said to me. Like, no, this is a story that I am telling myself. I put myself into this mental space. What is it really? And I'm like, what it is really is that's something that I feel insecure and shame over about myself. That is something that I put a pressure I put on myself. I'm not meeting those expectations to me. So I'm dumping that on someone else, and I can't run away with that story. Maybe I need to work on why does that make me insecure? What can I do in this to feel better? And it's like having more of those moments, which I will say I used to have zero of, is like, oh my gosh, like this feels better. Like I know what this is now. This isn't this person dumping their crap on me. This is me dumping my crap on me through their lens. And how, okay, now I can move forward from that. That almost feels relieving, but I had to put myself in that space of the yuck feeling of, oh, what is this really? How do I really feel about myself? What were they really saying versus what I was interpreting in my brain? And that's where it's like kind of undoing that and moving forward. So that I feel like that was a point where it could go into a traumatic thing of like, oh, of course, I just can't, I'm doing this again. I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy enough. And like, no, what is it really sort of thing? And that's, to me anyway, kind of where I feel like a real life moment of taking a situation and having a pause and breathing through it, and where it's like, well, yeah, it felt like a half hour of, oh, this is terrible versus, oh, I'm going to hold on to this feeling for the next 6 months.
Yes. So there's a couple of things you said in there. One, that moment, let me see if I can track. There's a couple of things. There's that awareness moment of like, wait a minute, maybe I'm projecting, right? But you had to sit with that, right?
Yeah.
That to me is, you can do that when you can sit in the pause, when you can take a deep breath. It's not about sitting in meditation in lotus position, breathing for hours and hours and hours, and then the world automatically changes because you manifested something. No. It's literally pausing between action and reaction. That's where the magic is. So if you can take one breath, again, you don't have to sit in silence forever and have no thoughts. One breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. You get some space from the situation, which allows you the capacity to ask those curious questions. With traumatic experiences, with trauma, with a lot of trauma, when you're in protection all the time, there's no space for curiosity. There's only certainty. The pause brings in our capacity for curiosity. Your question was, what is really going on? Now, what's my story? Not what I think. What's really going on? And that you're able to, in that moment, say, wow, I think it's about my insecurity. You didn't go to shame and blame. You went to awareness, and now you have agency. So that's the other thing I want to say. With trauma, when you experience trauma, abuse, neglect, car accidents, etc., you don't have any control. You can't act on your environment. So what you created in your scenario was the capacity for agency. I can make a decision. I can either go into now beating myself up for being insecure. I can push it away and say, oh no, but it's still probably them, right? You can stay in store. You can say, I actually can make a different choice here, right? And the third thing I want to name is, if you did all this, if you pause and you have a little bit of more curiosity, say what's going on, and what you actually come down to, the truth of it is, these people are talking shit about you. Well, guess what? Now you can have a boundary. So it doesn't mean you don't have to focus on changing anything out there. Everything outside can suck and be awful, but your internal capacity is where the work is. And at the end of the day, if someone else is wrong and you're right, that's okay. No one has to be the bad guy, but now you can have a boundary. And that's the other thing that we experience with traumatic experiences, right? Our boundary ruptures. So the work isn't about, I need these people to stop shitting on me. I need my child's health problems to go away. I need my boss not to be a jerk. It's how can I create the internal capacity to work with what's in the moment versus terrified about the past or anxious about the future.
Yeah. Oh God. That's awesome, but also so hard.
I didn't say this is easy. None of this is easy. Yeah. And I think that's where it comes to. You said it earlier, but this is one of the things I talk about. How regulation is a practice. Regulation, meaning the capacity. We really be up. Would you need to be up in adrenaline and then coming back down and ground? Or if you're really anxious, you can bring yourself and have that calm energy. That doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice. Dr. Bruce Perry says 1 45-minute therapy session once a week isn't going to do anything to shift the neuronal networks. Our networks are always firing over and over and over, right? So if you want to change those paths, those grooves in your brain, it takes a million little moments over time. It's all about practice. And I think that's the other thing I heard recently, I forget where, but how many calories it takes, how many calories we burn by creating new habits, because it's easier, it's less energy for our brain to keep doing the same thing we've always done. Because if we do something new, we're creating a new groove in the brain, and that takes energy. That's why we're exhausted when we try new things, right? So taking things slow, giving ourselves grace, and realizing that nothing's going to be a magic wand or a quick fix. It's all going to be over and over and over. Practice, practice, practice. And the practice is befriending the nervous system and making sure that we have a nervous system that can maintain or hold space for curiosity, not be stuck in fight or flight, which is all about certainty. I'm certain those people hate me. I'm certain that death is coming, right? That kind of certainty, it creates tension in our body, inflammation, heart disease, blah, blah, blah.
Well, and I love that point. I've not heard that either, of like the calorie burn of doing a new habit. And I think that, oh God, I just think that's so incredible because, especially when, at least in my world, thinking about you're doing habit changes of like I'm like, hey, I want to drink more water. I want to get more sleep. I want to exercise more. I want to eat better. I think we live in such an immediate gratification society that it's like, I want everything right now, and I'm going to change this new habit, and we're going to do this. And I mean, I'm 100% guilty of doing that a lot. And then you get frustrated when things aren't doing that to that level. But it's like, if you pull back and be like, well, that's not doable or sustainable for anyone. That's just not how the human brain works. And give yourself a breath and be like, this is going to take time. And chill out, especially as someone with like a hard time with patience. But realizing, at least I've realized for myself with everything of all the things that do end up working out and working out for the best, it is because it's taking those small baby steps one at a time, building habits. I'm a big believer, a fan of attaching new habits to old habits. Exactly, yeah. And just kind of slowly going until you're building that new groove in your brain. And it's like, that's something, especially again, in my world, and like you think of like health and fitness, that's not a message that anybody is giving out of, hey, you're creating a whole new, network in your brain. This is going to take a minute. And it's like, oh no, here, drink these shakes and here's a 30-day shred. And it's like, that's not going to do a damn thing in the long run.
It also doesn't do a damn thing because that is still symptomatic. If you've got a lot of stress, if you have a lot of unhealed trauma from your past, all of that is stored in your body. So it doesn't matter how many shakes, until I feel safe in my body and safe in relationship, my body is going to hold on to all this extra weight because it's protective. So that's the other thing, right? I'm not trying to make things simple. I'm not saying it is that simple. But if we worked with the stress response and nutrition and movement, then you're going to have a more holistic approach. And you're going to have, quote unquote, probably quicker, faster results because you're working with the body, not just against it. Right. So
definitely. Well, and just to go down another rabbit hole here, kind of all over the place, is, one of the things that I'm reading in this book called Lifting Heavy Things that really just flipped a light for me in my brain is I've always had a problem with like mind muscle connection, especially when it comes to like movement and exercise. And I just thought like, well, it's just not who I am. I've never been an athletic person or anything like that. And through this reading, it was like, no, you feel unsafe in your body. So when you feel unsafe in your body, you can't feel certain things. So it's like, I especially have problems with feeling my lower body, of like getting my glutes to turn on, or just, which has been a whole host of like problems why I'm literally seeing my physical therapist later today because I'm all like twisted out of place. And I think it's because through the experiences that the trauma I've had personally, that I don't feel safe in my own body and I don't allow myself to feel certain things. And that's where I'll do, specifically from an exercise standpoint of like, well, just go crush yourself, go do this thing and just like try to get feeling through that versus really kind of feeling in my own body in a healthier way. And that's a process I'm working on right now with that information of like, well, how do I feel safe in my own body? How do I get to a place where I can tune in and actually like feel my glutes or my quads or whatever and feel where my hips are in space instead of ignoring those sorts of things, because that's the way that I trained myself, was just to, ignore it, don't feel it. And that's, I'm not really sure what the solution to that is, but I think just knowing that that's probably exactly what I'm going through has been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, what you just named, with that awareness, with that education, it helps you bring out your own inner wisdom. Okay, now I have a direction I might need to go. I don't know the answer, but if you would look into somatic experiencing work, I would imagine that would be the place to start, because you would engage introceptive awareness. So like you said, feeling from the inside out. And then neuroceptive awareness, right? So if we're in the same space, our nervous systems are talking to each other, whether we're conscious of that or not. And if you're in a space where your nervous system can't settle because other nervous systems are dysregulated or they're threatening to you, even outside of your consciousness, you're not going to be able to, quote unquote, do that work. So where you would start is your physical space. Does it signal safety back to your body? Your relationships, do they signal safety? That starts to help you get more that feeling from the inside out. But it would be through a somatic experiencing practitioner that would walk through that type of work. So it's different. Our whole field of psychology and therapy is shifting from strictly headspace, cognitive work, to engaging the whole mind-body system, which to me and my generation is a no-brainer, because when we don't have access to that thinking brain when our nervous systems are all dysregulated, right? So the somatic experiencing world is that field that works with the body, with the mind-body connection.
Well, and I'm sure we've touched on some of these things already through this conversation, but I know you have, 5 invitations as a way of looking into trauma. And what are those?
Yeah, so I call these, I might have to change this up because I don't know if it makes sense to anyone else but me, but I was asked before, tell us 5 things you know about trauma. We're making these videos, those 5 things you know about trauma. And as I thought about that question, of course I thought about the hundreds of things that I know, all the literature, all the academia, there's so many things people know, quote unquote, about trauma, about this field. How do we boil that down to 5? And as I thought about that, I realized the 5 points that I came up with, they're true. They are true statements. They are facts. And for me, it's not about just hook, line, and sinker, believe and keep going, but I invite people to consider these as true. And if they're true, how do they impact how we talk about ourselves and how we talk about other people? How does it impact the stories that we hear? So you tell me a story and I'm going to filter through this lens that helps me orient to people and problems in a way that is trauma informed. And by trauma informed, I really mean we're just taking in consideration the nervous system and the experiences we've had, right? So even the word trauma doesn't feel good for folks. Think about stress, toxic stress, right? Where your nervous system is dysregulated. There are things that are going to happen from that. If you feel safe in your body, you're going to be able to behave in safe ways. If you feel unsafe in your body, you're going to behave in unsafe ways. So this lens, or these 5 invitations, it is just that. It's like X-ray goggles. The first one is that trauma is stored in the body. So just taking that sentence as itself, it gets rid of this solely cognitive work when we're looking about healing from trauma, right? It gets rid of the myth of, what were you thinking? Yelling at a child. What were you thinking? Well, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling and sensing, and I was reacting to the terror I felt in my body, right? So when we use that first invitation, trauma is stored in the body, I think of myself, if I'm an educator, I'm going to consider, how do I engage the body of young people throughout the day? It's archaic to sit and be quiet for 8 hours. We need to move. So how do I engage the body to upregulate and burn off energy? How do I engage the body to come down and downregulate, to be present, to be focused and engaged, right? So the first one is trauma stored in the body. And I could talk about these all day. This is what I talk about all day long. So I'll try to bring the points in, and then we can go. The second one is regulation is a practice. Like I said before, instead of dealing with or focusing on coping mechanisms in the stressful moment, not cope right now, we need to regulate over time. And you do those practices in low stress environments, so they'll kick in on autopilot in the high stress environment. So regulation is a practice. Trauma stored in the body. Regulation is a practice. The third one is perceived threat and real threat both feel the same in the body. If that is true, that perceived threat can activate our nervous system, the perception of your colleagues dumping on you, the perception of that got your heart rate going, right? Versus a real threat, right? So perceived and real threat, they can both activate that stress response. If that's true, we'll stop blaming and shaming people for their survival strategies. We'll stop, and the other thing, we'll start to connect with people before we correct, right? I like this one. Why did you do that? Or again, what were you thinking? Right, this reaction and what that does. For this one, that notion of I think about educators a lot or parents like, hey, why are you screaming? Why are you crying? Everything's fine, right? So you tell a child who's having a tantrum, a meltdown, that everything's fine. It takes away their entire reality, right? So if both perceived threat and real threat feel the same in the body, and someone is reacting as if they're under threat, we need to connect with them emotionally and connect to safety before we correct or go to logic or rationale. That was the point of that. Got a little off track, but that was the point. The fourth invitation is that trauma symptoms are survival strategies, right? Overeating, could be a trauma symptom, but it was protective. It was a solution at one point, right? Now, it's a problem for physicians, right? If their patients aren't taking care of their body, engaging in obesity, etc. But one person's problem could be that person's solution. So we don't just stop eating. You have to work with the whole mind-body system so people can feel safer in their bodies. So again, instead of blaming and shaming people's survival strategies, drinking, drugging, fighting, screaming, running away, shutting down, those are all ways to either seek safety or seek protection, right? So instead of shaming and blaming those, let's honor what they've done to keep the person alive, and then we can start to shift to more pro-social ways of being, right? So trauma symptoms are survival strategies is the fourth. And the fifth invitation is that healing happens in relationship. Trauma doesn't happen in isolation, neither does healing. They both happen in the context of relationship. So doing this work alone is a myth. We need to be in community with others. And it doesn't mean I have to be with you every single day. But when I know Amanda's out there doing her work, and I know Rochelle's out there doing her work, and we can collaborate and connect and hear each other's stories and listen deeply to one another, that's where that healing magic happens. It's not just all alone and now I come back to the world. We do this in relationship.
Those are all amazing. I mean, so many of those are just like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm living through all of this. One is I think that it was a game changer for me, or again, just kind of changing the story in my mind, the narrative I had around a lot of like binge eating, was that it was a survival mechanism. Like I did something to take care of myself. Like that's how I knew how to deal. And that was the best thing that I could have done for myself in the moment. And at least for me, as I having this podcast and all the people I talk to in my own, going through therapy, it's like, okay, well, that's something that I used as a survival mechanism before. It served me well. Good job, me. Don't terrorize myself for it, but thank myself for it. But it's like, but I don't need, that doesn't serve me anymore. So how do I come up with another game plan that does serve me, that is in a healthy way, so I'm still know how to take care of myself, but I'm not taking care of myself by secretly binge eating 2 large pizzas to the point of pain and then hating myself that night and the next day. And I think that's been incredibly a different way to view that, where I spent so much time, again, shaming myself and telling myself like, what a piece of shit I am because I'm doing these things. And, I just felt like, oh, well, I have no self-control. And another thing to one of your other, points of, with the pain or it being stored in the body. And this is something that I went through last year, and through that being an experience I had that I'm actually going through now of finding levels of high stress, I kind of see that where my body will physically break down, where I had a very high, I mean, we all had really high stress moments in 2020 and that my just kind of like my back just kind of like, my low back went kind of nuts and had sciatica and kind of took me out where I couldn't exercise and nobody could figure it out until I kind of, went through some of this process and these conversations, again, to your connection point, because I'm having these open conversations and being honest and open about my experience. I've learned of like, when I'm stressed, maybe it's not only just a physical injury, but mentally my body is like locking it up and protecting me in a way of like, maybe you should slow down, bitch. And and like, let's focus on this. And you're running too hard and your body, like the body just can't keep up. And I'm in that same sort of thing now where I did do something really, stupid. I hurt my back going down a slide at a playground because I am an adult child, but also I'm working through it in a different way, knowing I'm also in a very high stress period of my life right now. And that knowing that this seems to be a pattern because it's happened last year, it's happening now. There's one thing to trigger it, and then my body just locks up and holds in that moment. I feel mentally through stress. So this time around, I'm like, not only do I need to find some physical solutions to get me out of this physical pain in the body, but I'm using my brain knowing this kind of injuries also, not to say that, every injury is this way, but it's that there is a mental piece to it. There is a stress piece to it. And how do I massage myself mentally and physically to get myself out of pain? And that has been something this process is moving so much more quickly this time, and something that now I can learn lessons from this moving forward of like, when I'm in moments of high stress, my body seems to clench up in these, physical pain ways. And how do I work through that? And I feel like that's something that I didn't think about until last year, of when these sort of things happen in my physical body, of the mental aspects. And again, how am I storing some of this trauma, and how is it kind of coming to fruition or showing itself to me in my physical body, rather than just, it's a physical injury. It's a mental injury manifesting in a physical form.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful.
And I feel like that seems to me like something that you've worked through. I mean, does that seem like an accurate description of kind of like how do you run into a lot of people that have these physical aches and pains, and it's like, hey, maybe it's not just that you banged your knee into the coffee table, although, this is a bad example, but maybe that, you're having like these back problems, or you're having these neck aches or these migraines, and it's attached to, where your mental space is versus just your physical space.
Yes. The biggest point I think that you're making is it's a myth that they're separate, right?
Yeah.
My colleague Claudia Lopez told me, I love this little one-liner. When you have let's say, back in the day when we had conferences and people had to say, what's the head count for the meeting or for the conference? But when we're dead, you hear, what's the body count from the war?
Yeah. Yikes.
Why are we reduced to just our, right? Isn't that profound, right?
Yeah.
Our body isn't considered, right? So we have a myth in our society where we're cut off from the neck down. Intellect is valued. Cognitive capacity is valued. Your thought, what you think about it. Use your brain. All of it, it's a myth that these systems aren't connected and that they don't play off on one another. So while your stressful thoughts, if I get in thoughts, this podcast is going to be horrible, what am I going to say? I'm not ready to do it. And I do that, I am going to have physical implications from that. My shoulders are going to be up. My neck is going to be tight, right? That's a way where your thoughts can create stress. The opposite is also true. If I take a deep breath and I use affirmations, right? The power of our word. I'm enough. I belong. I'm okay. I'm worthy of being on this conversation, right? That messaging back to myself can lower that stress. But that's top-down work. That's using those thoughts to impact the rest of the body. What we are starting to learn more about in our world is the bottom-up work, where you use your physical body to help, again, I think it's make space or create that space for pause in your brain to where you can get more creative with your thoughts or with your decisions, et cetera, right? So if I have a back injury, instead of talking, why did I do that? Instead of working myself up there or just doing massage, if I can engage the two and have the mind-body connection, I can get in a comfortable position. I can have some deep breaths. I can have some healing thoughts. I can do interoceptive work where I'm visualizing the healing practices. I'm not saying it's all that simple, right? My partner has 2 herniated discs, and for a year and a half, she's done mostly emotional, relational work, dealing with old past wounds and family trauma. And a lot of that is stored in your bag. And she can go through these phases where she'll be able to walk and lift and be really, really active when she's done that emotional work. And when a crisis, a family crisis happened or something else stressed, she can feel that and it compromises her physical back, right? There's a whole, I forget what the book is, but it was this physician talked about TMS, tension myoneural syndrome, where people thought they had herniated discs, they thought they had needed surgery, etc., but it was the emotional stress that was creating the physical health problem. And once they addressed the emotional and mental aspects, the physical health problems went away, right? So to your point, it's a both and. It's not a what happened first type of thing, right? And we're not separate. We're not separate from our body. We are. Our history, what our ancestors went through is stored in our body, right? Our mental and emotional energy is manifest through the body and vice versa.
So I guess I don't know if you have the answer to this, but just to kind of think of like the things that, you know, are topics that come up, you know, for me all the time. And especially when people are like, hey, I'm not happy where I am now, and I want to live a healthier life, whatever that means for them, of, you know, getting more sleep, getting more hydrated. I'm going to start an exercise routine. I'm going to start eating a little bit healthier, or those sorts of things, especially when people kind of go into like diet mode. And then it ultimately like locks up and it doesn't kind of work, which I've been at before. Do you think it's a level of like, you just have this mental stress of like, you got to do this thing, you got to lose the weight, you got to get healthy. My doctor says I need to move more. You need to do these things. And it's like almost you undo all of the work that you want to do because you get yourself into a mental spiral. So you're just immediately setting yourself up for that failure because you're stressing about this healthy, quote unquote, you know, this thing that you want to do to better yourself, but the level of stress in your brain is basically making it unable to happen.
Yes. I'm gonna, the answer is yes. Here's the example I would throw back at that. Well, one I said before about certainty versus curiosity. And when you're in certainty with your thoughts and your opinions, that's a sign, that's a symptom of constriction. That's a symptom of my ego being attacked, or I have to be right, or I'm a bad person, right? So when you can get into curiosity, I'm not really sure about that. Let's think about the questions, right? That's a symptom of a relaxed and a regulated nervous system. So certainty is a symptom of a dysregulated nervous system, constriction. Curiosity is what happens when we have a more regulated nervous system. In fear-based methodologies, or what you were trying to say about I got to do this, right? And that to me, that's fear-based, right? That's intimidation-based. That kind of energy brings constriction. And when you're in constriction or when you're in dysregulation, the thinking brain is offline, and all of the energy in your body is now oriented towards survival because your body thinks that you're under attack. And if your body thinks you're under attack, guess what it does? It doesn't digest food properly. It doesn't, you know what I mean? The metabolism is all messed up. You're not going to go to the bathroom when you need to because you're going to hold it all the time to pee. You have to go to, right? So you're working against yourself if you have this drill mode. Now, do I think that the drill doesn't have a place? No, of course it does. That's positive stress. That's when I'm getting ready to do a bench press and I'm walking around the weight room like, yeah, I got this. Oh, come on, pop. And I go do it. That's adrenaline. But that's not persistent throughout the day. There's a moment for that. And I'm not doing it through shame and blame and fear. If I don't do this, I'm a bad person. And the analogy I was going to give a minute ago, the example I was going to throw back, is when we think about children and the fear-based parenting techniques. Now, I'm not going on about what's right parenting, wrong parenting, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about safe and unsafe when it comes to the nervous system. If you are at a restaurant and you're irritated because your child isn't ordering quick enough, and you say to them, you need to pick something now, right, with your face all done, your gritted teeth, what's happening in your child's body then is terror is released because that power over it creates this fear, and then the kid can't decide what to eat because now my thinking brain is offline and my body's in that stuck place. So I'm either going to submit, which is a survival strategy. Okay, I'll get the chicken fingers. Or I'm going to be frozen. I don't know what I want. And now mom or dad is pissed off because now you can't decide. But they caused that. That was the antecedent. The fear-based orientation is the antecedent to a stress response activation, right? So if I back all the way up, my point is, and I think your point is, when we're trying to make change, we're trying to make habits, we can work against ourselves by saying, you should do it, you should, or you should, or we can work with ourselves. And if pumping up, if big energy is what helps for you, come from a more positive angle. All right, Buff, you got this. Your doctor said you need to lose weight. You want to lose weight. That means you're aligned. Okay, we got this together. You can bring in that energy. But if we do it through shame and blame or fear, our body responds to that in terror, and then we hold on. We fight, we flee, we submit, and now our system can't work. There's no flow, if that makes sense. There's no energy flow. There's just constriction. And guess what happens in constriction? Blood vessels, again, cholesterol up, inflammation here and there. I'm not a freaking doctor. I don't propose to be, right? But these are the things that happen when we're in that fear-based or stress-based state. Our body cannot work with that. It can only then go into survival. So our body does exactly what it's designed to do when we talk shit about ourselves. It protects us. But that doesn't help us relieve our neck tension and lose our weight and create a new habit, right?
Yeah. I'm curious if you've gotten this a lot in your career, because I just feel like these kinds of conversations before kind of almost get thrown into of like, oh, well, that's woo-woo-y shit.
Sure.
So it's like that this all makes so much sense. And for me, living this and going through some of these steps, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is what has given me so many solutions and has improved my life, helping me live my best life, helping me live my healthiest life. But it feels like all of this, think about trauma stored in the body, and we're doing all this gets pushed into a corner of like, all right, if you want to do that woo-woo-y thing, whatever, crunchy granola.
Yeah, exactly. Here's my response to that, or actually my orientation of that. The reason why I love neuroscience, the reason why I like to learn about what neurochemicals are released when you volunteer or when you tell a lie, or the reason why I think that's interesting is because it's freaking science. So I think that there's a benefit of keeping things super scientific, right? To kind of make space for the naysayers around spirituality or woo-woo stuff. But the science terms are just giving language to what spiritual people already understand and know, right? So I think instead of getting a debate, what's woo-woo and what's not, or what's science, what's not, I would invite people to pay attention. Pay attention to your own experience. Listen to your own body. What's it telling you, right? Don't take my word for it. Sit down, engage the pause, and let me know what arises, right? If you sit down, this is fucking stupid, I hate this. Well, let's pay attention to what's happening. You're certain that this sucks. You're cussing, right? Which is bringing your heart rate up, right? So it's not even about opinion at this point. If we can keep it grounded in science, and that these are physiological things happening, we don't have to get into theory or what's right or what's wrong, or again, opinion based. It's just understanding the actual scientific implications of what happened and then what we see from, or the behavioral patterns that we see from what happened, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does.
But I get it all the time. I get it from well-meaning parents and educators and social workers, and everything says, oh, that doesn't work. None of this shit works unless you try it. Yeah. A. B, things take time. Building a new neural network takes time. Building relationship takes time. And what we know, we have concrete evidence and research for, is we cannot learn anything new when we don't feel safe. And we cannot grow in relationship with others when we don't have trust or boundaries, right? So we have to that's why it's the fifth one, but it's the most important point. Healing happens in relationship. Our human capacity, the human capacity to relate to one another, that is the healing component. When you can feel safe, seen, and heard, all kinds of magic stuff happen in your brain and body. And it's not about being woo-woo. It's about, if I don't feel safe, I'm going to be in protection, and that doesn't let me use my full thinking brain. It doesn't let me use all the wisdom I have, right? So for me, it's when I hear that pushback, what I'm hearing is you're scared, you're feeling threatened, you're not feeling curious, you're in certainty. So I'm going to drop the numbers and the statistics and the science, and I'm going to just deeply listen and let you talk yourself into your own solution. And I'm going to offer that presence, because people have a lot of wisdom. And when we get out of certainty, we can usually come to a compromise or a shared awareness, a shared understanding with one another.
Yeah. Well, to stay on the relationship component, of that. I mean, I'm sure you could speak to then I think that we've all kind of heard this or seen the meme of like, you are the sum of the 5 closest people in your life sort of thing. Or, if you're the people around you aren't supporting you, you don't have a circle, you have a cage sort of thing, and how important that is to the people that are in your community. I mean, how large of a role is that if the people that you are having relationships with aren't the people that are serving your new goals and new habits?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just that's it. That's exactly it. That if you are in relationship with, if I'm going to talk about myself, I'm trying to better myself. I'm trying to be a safer, more connected person in my personal and professional relationships. And if part of that means lessen gossip, lessen shit talking to myself, and literally get out of that type of conversation. I'd rather talk about things like this. What matters to you? What's your purpose? What do you care about in the world versus gossip or surface things, right? So if I know that those types of conversations not only are draining, but they're going to take me off of a path of being more embodied and more connected to people, then I'm not going to choose to spend time with folks. I'm going to start to set some boundaries. If my entire circle is all we do is gossip and talk shit, right? If that's what I'm around, I can't just take that hat off and go into a different life, or I'm going to be disembodied. I'm going to have an incongruent experience. So yes, I think we do need to pay attention to who we're surrounded by, but I hesitate to say that because that's still looking outward, right? We need to look inward. So I think the connection there is, how do I feel when I'm in this relationship? How do I feel when I walk away from this person? Do I feel good about myself? Do I feel supported? Do I feel pushed in a way that's there's a scaffolding, right? Am I able to be challenged by this person? It feels it's not about being demeaned or, all these types of things, right? And I can check in with myself. Am I trusting my own relationship with myself? If so, I'm able to trust my relationship with others, right? So often we look outward, these 5 people, maybe they're not the ones I want. Who am I to myself? How do I talk to myself? How do I take care of myself? Am I kind to myself? My partner says how we talk to ourselves is how we talk to other people. So I can't be hard on myself and expect myself to be gentle with you, right? Yeah. It's got to start with self.
Yeah, that's such an awesome point, because I just know that so many people that I've talked to, and I've lived this too, of like, when you are starting to make those changes, whatever those are, to whatever, you're just like, I'm not happy right here, I need to change in these ways, that people can really have a negative reaction to that because you're inflicting change that they don't want to deal with, or you're making them look at themselves in certain ways, and how incredibly hard that is, and how easy it is to just be like, oh, well, I'm going to back off this thing because I don't want to lose this person. I don't want to make this person angry if, I'm over here like trying to like eat my healthiest meals and do my own thing, and they're kind of being assholes about it. Then it's like, you have the choice of like, do I have a conflict and do this thing for me and know there's going to be conflict with this person, or do I cave into what they want to do so I can resolve the conflict and just kind of go back into that comfortable rut that you're used to? And I think that is so hard. And I think that that's where, at least in my experience, the conversations I've had, where a lot of people will be like, okay, well, I'm going to stop doing this for me because it's making the people around me behave in ways that's uncomfortable to them, and it's not my goal to make other people uncomfortable or angry with the situation. So especially as me as a people pleaser, to be like, okay, well, I'm going to do what I need to do. Maybe it's not best for me anymore, but I don't want to deal with a yucky situation with another person. And that's, where it's like you're trying to do the healthy thing to deal with your own trauma, and it's almost creating a new sort of trauma to deal with. And it's like, man, that's just a mess.
It is a mess. And I'll bring us back to the pause, right? So I think there's a bridge there. It's either I do my healthy thing and get rid of my friends, or I just cave and now I'm just with them. The middle ground there is ground in what do you want, what helps and serves you. And then with that awareness, with that ground, now I can come with consciousness to the relationship and say, hey, can we talk about something? Can we talk about my experience? And engage the conversation, because it's very possible that both parties are in habit, right? I'm trying to do better, but when I get around you, I downplay and, oh, no, it's not that, da, da, da. And they're still in unconscious. There's a book, it's called Conscious Loving, and I love this image of 2 ostriches with their head in the sand, right? a lot of us, we got our heads in the sand. Our whole bodies are out and we're living life, but we're just la, 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 didn't see it, right? So when we can bring awareness to the situation, maybe we can find out where do we have agency. If I have a conversation with my friend group and say, hey, y'all, it's very vulnerable for me, but I want to talk about my experience. Can you share yours? And now we have awareness and consciousness. We can choose to either work on our friendship or we can choose to separate from there. But if we just decide I have to be isolated and do what's right for me, or I have to cave with my friends, we're not looking at our own agency, right? So, and I think when we're around our friends who aren't changing and we're not talking about it, it creates a lot of mind monsters, it creates a lot of assumptions, and it doesn't invite them into their higher self, into their best self, right? So we don't have to do it through shame and blame, but we can do it through clear communication. There's another thing you said, though, that I kind of on this same thread. A lot of times when we start to change, we start to think, oh, this relationship is changing, or have they always been this crazy, or they've always been this awful, right? And we start to wonder what's going on again out there. When we change, our lens changes. So you could be the same person every day, always and forever. And as I do my own work, you start to change in front of me because I'm seeing you differently. I have new levels of awareness. I have new practices, right? So we have to be careful and not to project out like, why is this relationship so awful? Well, I'm changing. And now I have it's like those in the optometrist when they click, what's better, 1 or 2? The click, 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 right? All that clicking, as I shift my lens, the world around me changes, right? My perception, my understanding, my patience, my curiosity all shifts. So I really think kind of that one of the answers to all these questions is start with the self. A lot of times we put all this energy out, but if we could take some of that and put it back into the self, we start to create our own, what do we call it, our own ground, and we can start to trust our truth. We start to trust our intuition, and that can serve us when we navigate difficult conversations versus now I'm in submit, now I'm in flee, etc.
Yeah. Well, I know not everybody has a podcast or, or just, has a way to go back and listen. God, if you listen to when I started this thing, I think if you listen to every episode, which, rock star people who have listened over 700 episodes, my God, that you can hear me change and evolve. And even just something that happened to me earlier this week. Again, all these examples just happened in the past week that I went back and listened to a conversation that I had 2 months ago. And it was a conversation specifically about me and goals. And it was kind of like a coaching sort of call. And I went back and listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the things that were said to me, I'm already hearing in a different way and I'm interpreting them differently, even though this conversation was 2 months ago. And even hearing my answers and my responses, which again, listening to my own podcast and hearing how I respond or what questions I choose and hearing that I was like, oh, I should have said this. And why did I say it this way? And it's only in a 2-month span, which in 2 months, it doesn't feel like I've done any sort of major growth or change or, change of a perception of the world. But it's like, man, when I go back and I can listen to this conversation of myself, or even if you're journaling or doing anything where I'm like, over 2 months, my perceptions have already changed. And if I already would have handled this situation differently, I would have said this differently. I would have had a different understanding of what I heard. And I think understanding that about myself takes me in a better spot moving forward, or just in this moment, in this conversation, in the next conversation I have, of knowing that, I think it's helpful for me anyway to frame it as I'm doing the very best that I can in this moment. And I could look back and be like, oh God, dumbass, why did you say it that way? Right. But that's the best that I had in that moment. That was my understanding in the moment. And isn't it cool that I have changed that already and it's shifted and grown? And then again, having those relationships around me of people that understand of we're all kind of doing this together and we're all growing and learning every single day. And to take that perspective of instead of why did you change and why did you say it that way?
Exactly.
And I think that's a hard thing again to settle in and see that about yourself and have that perspective, because it's always just so go, distract, and you don't ever stop and actually think about those things, and it's really easy to just spin out in your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just think that's, I don't know. They're all the things that I'm kind of learning as I'm trying to pause and do those things. And again, I'm not good at meditating of sitting down in a lotus position. That just sounds like I'd rather lay in traffic.
No need.
But but going for a walk, for me, taking a shower or taking a bath, of like having these things. And I think that's, I guess, from my perspective, an important thing too, of having those kind of habit changes is attaching it to something that I already find joy in. So how do I do this kind of self-work in a place that already does feel safe for me, like taking a walk or taking a shower, and then kind of doing that work in a place that's already safe? Is that something that you would like recommend to people?
100%. If we try to change through fear, through pain, through distress, we're just working against our own nervous system, right? That's where we bring the science, right?
Yeah.
When we connect, not only, I love the notion of attaching things to what we already do, but the notion of, like you said, eliciting joy, pleasure. Am I in a want space versus a need space, right? All of those are ways where these habits are going to have a higher probability of sticking and supporting us because it's not bringing us pain, right? We can learn lessons through pain. We can learn lessons through love and joy and peace. When you start to grow in that direction, again, you have a higher probability of getting on that healing journey. I'm not saying if you had X amount of traumatic experience as a young person and you have a terrible relationship, but hurt, always just sit there and breathe and think about peace. It's not that simple. And it is that simple that we have capacity to sit in the pause. Again, the past and the future we have no control over those. What we do have is some agency, some control in connecting to this present moment. And when we can pause into that without an action step attached to it, things will unfold.
That's awesome. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, this is speaking my language here. Like, how does somebody work with you? Do you just you do like one-on-one coaching, or what do you do?
Yeah, so you can go to soulbirdconsulting.info. That's our website, and we're going through some changes even within our company, right? But there's still information about us, and there's email, way to get a hold of us. My main lens right now is training, speaking, consulting with folks. And I'm not the only person with Soulbird, right? We have other colleagues and teammates who offer workshops and trainings and support. A couple folks who do one-on-one work. I don't personally myself, but there are people within Soulbird who do. So if people are digging this conversation, I personally work with schools, mental health agencies, disability boards, parent groups, etc. But my audience, I hope, can grow and larger. My basic understanding is how to be a person. If you're a human being and you spend time with other human beings, I personally think this conversation will be beneficial. So whatever the lens, whatever the context, this is what I'm talking about. Awesome.
So if you had to name, other than yourself, like a good resource for somebody to kind of start doing this work, what would it be?
Yeah. Well, so Danae Riggs is a soul birder. She does a lot of work with folks who have developmental disabilities and complex trauma histories. LaShonda Sugg does classes. She just finished a series on cultivating your functional adult. And so she would be someone I would recommend to anyone she does relationship coaching and counseling, and she defines relationship very broad. Colleagues create a family, a relationship. Businesses are in relationship, sports teams, right? So she does group work. And then she also does trainings and lectures and motivational speaking as well. LaShonda Sugg from Labors of Love, Danae Riggs here from Soulbird, Amy Chavez from lovesomatics.org. She is a great mind-body practitioner. So those are some names that come to the top of my head.
Oh, that's awesome. I want to talk to all these people.
Yes, please. I listen to their contacts immediately.
Awesome. Oh my God. Well, I just feel like I could talk to you forever. I mean, go down a million different rabbit holes, but I know that you've definitely got stuff to do, and I've already taken up your time. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to wrap this up somewhere instead of just be like, talk to me for 6 hours today. So thank you so much for this conversation. I mean, I just think that this is such, an important topic for people, and something that's not discussed a lot, just trauma in general. Although I feel like we're getting to a better place talking about mental health and trauma because of COVID. Yeah. So right. You're very much needed right now.
Thank you.
So thank you again for this conversation. Absolutely amazing. I love what you're doing, and you are welcome back anytime and as often as you would like.
Nice. Deal. Thanks, Amanda.
AmandaValentineBites.com